On today's State of Purple podcast, after a few dicey days in Minnesota, our new head coach, Kevin O'Connell, has officially been introduced. The Eagle has landed. And on that same day, a report comes out saying that Deshaun Watson has interest in the Minnesota Vikings. But do the Vikings have interest in Deshaun Watson? It's the State of Purple podcast presented by Pilot Games.
Seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop. Steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay in oh my God! 30! No 10! Touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Oh my God! No way! What a miracle finish!
Hey, happy Wednesday, and welcome to the State of Purple podcast. That's Jack Day. I'm AJ Mansour. Today, we got some stuff to talk about, Jack. It's been a little bit quiet the last couple days in Minnesota Vikings territory. We've been waiting for our head coach to be announced, and he finally was. Tell me the truth, Jack. Did you have any nervousness the last couple days when Kevin O'Connell was not immediately introduced on Monday morning as the Vikings head coach? Did it ever creep into your mind that the worst-case Josh McDaniels situation could flow into things?
I mean, we're in Minnesota, so I think everything crept into our minds. But I did check in on it yesterday. Kind of got calmed down a little bit when I checked in because there was no panic on the other end of things and said – his nameplate's already on the wall, so there was a lot of confidence from the Viking side that this deal was going to get done. Still very relieving to find that out. Go on to Twitter, get the Bleacher Report notification, wherever you get your notifications. Extremely relieving that the Vikings aren't going to have to go through that Josh McDaniels stuff because I don't know what would have happened. I think Vikings Twitter, the Vikings fan base, I literally think might have burnt to the ground if that wouldn't have happened, or if that would have happened. I don't think that this fan base would have handled it very well. There was still some good options out there. Raheem Morris, the D coordinator for the Rams, who also just won a Super Bowl. But I think at the end of the day, what the Vikings are trying to do, even though now he's coming for his press conference tomorrow at 4 p.m. Central Time, you got to let the guy enjoy his Super Bowl. He just did something that not many people get to say that they have done, and hopefully he's going to get the chance to do that for the first time in Minnesota as well. But it's his first Super Bowl ring. Let him enjoy that, or his first Super Bowl ring as a coach. I'm not sure if he was on a Patriots team when they won one or not. That's something I can look up after. But at the end of the day, they just won a Super Bowl, and I think you have to let him enjoy that. The parade's today, and hopefully he's having a good time out there.
It was an interesting situation, though, and obviously everyone goes to sourcing and talks to people that they know that might have some inside information. But at the same time, Vikings fans' fatalism, it was kicking in hardcore. And the way that it was kind of shaken out with Sean McVay saying that he's not sure what he's going to do, we'll have to see whether or not I retire and go into TV, and then what happens, who do we hand the team over to? Worst case scenario for the Minnesota Vikings felt like, we don't know what we're going to do. Like, we're back to square one. All the other options have been hired. And what do we do now? And in reality, if Sean McVay does retire, does step away from the game temporarily, permanently, whatever it is, the Rams are in that same position. So to say that Kevin O'Connell wouldn't have for sure been handed the team is probably true, but it's not as if all the options that were on the table a month ago were available for the Rams to look for a hire. So it probably they would have had to look at guys like Raheem Morris, guys like Kevin O'Connell to be their first options to hand that team to. So that got a little weird. Then you have Paul Allen, who had some stuff scheduled for Thursday that was supposedly going to be with Kevin O'Connell at the Vikings Entertainment Network. That got canceled, and he mentioned that on the radio. That didn't help when everyone started freaking out and saying, okay, oh my gosh, PA, he's the man, he's tied in, he's going to host these things with the coach, and those got canceled. It looks like now that was just a timing situation. Kevin O'Connell doing the parade, doing the celebration today. He's going to get in sometime, late tomorrow morning, early afternoon, and then the press conference actually isn't until 4 p.m. So the reschedule for the VEN was probably simply because he's not coming into town prior, as early in the day as they thought, and they didn't have time to do the VEN stuff. But it is official. Kevin O'Connell was introduced today via social media, via press release by the Minnesota Vikings as the 10th, I believe, head coach of the franchise. And tomorrow at 4 p.m., he'll meet the press, he'll meet everybody, and start the job. Because there were some notes that you were tweeting out too, Jack, retweeting. I think Peter Schrager put out a note that this is going to be the latest a coach has been hired since 2018. It probably goes beyond that as well, but there's some situations that are just weird with that year there too. But a late hire as far as in the game. He's got to get going right away, right? Him and Kwesi have some catching up to do. This changes the direction of the franchise, Jack. Are you in favor? And I guess we don't have a choice. So are you excited, I guess, about the direction that this kind of goes? We've speculated, and now it's officially here.
Yeah, I'm extremely excited. And like you said, they have to hit the ground running almost instantly because the combine is 2 weeks away. And then I was looking it up today. Free agency starts in just a month. We're only a month away from free agency. And there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes, getting that draft board ready. I don't know how much that is going to change with the new head coach and new GM. I know the scouting department was kind of already working on that. But you have to imagine that Kwesi coming in and Kevin O'Connell coming in, they're going to get their hands on that, and they're going to kind of alter what has already been done. But I want to just touch on what you were talking about before for the Vikings too. If Kevin O'Connell wouldn't have came here, that there was bridges that were burnt already too. Jim Harbaugh was a name that everyone, I think you and myself included, kind of got talked into a little bit and were excited about. That bridge was burnt because he had interest in coming to Minnesota, and they kind of pushed him away because Kevin O'Connell was their guy all along. I know they had a couple extremely long interviews, but it's just kind of felt like Kevin O'Connell was the leading candidate all along. Obviously, the Jim Harbaugh news broke and things kind of went sideways for a little while. But yeah, I am excited. I think we can finally, there's some big decisions that we've talked about a little bit more extensively on previous episodes with the Neil Hunter's contract, Kirk Cousins' contract, and just figuring out what's going to happen with some of these veteran players on this team, because that is going to tailor what's going to happen down the road with free agency and with the draft. I've been trying to avoid this Kevin O'Connell noise the last couple of days, is because it was pretty loud if you were on Vikings Twitter at all over the last couple of days, by diving into mock drafts I've done. I don't want to admit how many mock drafts I've done in the last couple of days, but I think when we get some clarity, it's going to make that side of things that much more entertaining from a fan perspective, because we're going to know what the Vikings need. Right now, I think you can make a case that they have a need at almost every position on the field, especially on that defensive side. And getting Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah in the building is the first step in getting closer to kind of having a better understanding of what's going to happen come April or May during that draft.
Well, we're excited about the coaching hire. We're excited about the new direction of the team. If you're excited as well and you're watching this live stream, feel free to throw some comments in that section. We'll pull them up on the screen and do a Q&A section at the end of today's podcast. And if you're listening to the podcast on replay, thank you. We appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe, and you'll get every episode of the State of Purple podcast, including last week's episode, Jack, where we talked about the potential change and the shift of having a new defense come into the picture. So you talk about what this team is going to do, what the directions are going to be, and how the personnel are going to fit. Across the board, there are going to be questions, right? We don't know exactly what sort of scheme O'Connell or whoever he brings with him from LA as an offensive coordinator might bring to the table. We think we know a little bit of what Donatel might bring to the table when it comes to defensive schemes. Are they going to go to a 3-4? We don't know that for sure. So there's a lot of questions that go to this. And as we continue to get closer to the draft, we continue to get closer to free agency, those questions are going to start to answer. But I think that first things first, Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell need to get in the room and figure out what their plan is, what their direction is going to be, what this is going to be. Because until O'Connell gets his staff together, Kwesi can't start formulating for free agency. Until Kwesi starts formulating for free agency, O'Connell can't start putting his roster together. So it's kind of an ebb and flow there with both sides of it. So you have that opportunity there, Jack. And then on Wednesday, February 16th, potential bomb gets dropped on this organization. A rumor, or not, I don't want to say a rumor. This is a report. This is an actual report from Jeremy Fowler, with ESPN. Reputable guy. He actually was here covering the Vikings for a couple of years back in the day, and I think he's in Pittsburgh now working for ESPN. Jeremy Fowler drops this report saying that Deshaun Watson, the embattled quarterback for the Houston Texans, legal troubles off the field, missed the entire season this last year, wasn't able to get traded to the Miami Dolphins. Well, he's taken matters into his own hands, and he's starting to look for teams that might fit him. Now, this is why that's important, okay? He has a full trade clause in his contract. So he has to first approve a team that he is going to get traded to before there's even any sort of conversation or potential for him to get moved. The two teams that were mentioned, the two teams that he's interested in, that he's has on his radar, I think was the exact terminology, are the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Makes sense. A very good team. Tom Brady just retired. And the other team, the Minnesota Vikings. An interesting wrinkle that I don't think anybody had really thought about, had inquired upon, or even looked into. This adds a wrinkle to the Kirk Cousins situation. It adds an unknown wrinkle with Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. Clearly, there's some off-the-field stuff, Jack, with Deshaun Watson. Put that to the side for just a second. We will talk about that because we can't ignore it. But the potential excitement of getting a player like Deshaun Watson, who is a superstar quarterback, at least last we saw him, he was nearly 5,000 yards, 33 touchdowns passing, 3 touchdowns on the ground, 400 plus rushing yards. He's a mobile quarterback. He's a big arm quarterback. He's a young quarterback. He's 26 years old. To even hear him say that he might consider coming to the Minnesota Vikings, it's got to perk your ears up a little bit, right?
Yeah, it certainly does. And I think it should perk the ears of this fan base up, not only from the Deshaun Watson. I know there's a lot of people that would be 100% against that because of the off the field stuff. And I completely understand that. But what intrigues me about this is a year ago, I don't think the Vikings were on his list. I think there was a couple teams, right. I want to say like Pittsburgh and Miami. It almost feels like this new offensive scheme that's being brought to Minnesota piqued his interest. And now, hey, he's like, the Vikings have an offensive-minded, younger guy at the head coaching position, and look at all the talent they have up there. If I could go up there, the offensive line might not need to be absolutely perfect because he's not a true traditional pocket passer. He has that mobility. He's played under the biggest lights. He won a national championship at Clemson. The guy is a baller. He's a great football player, and he would be, in my opinion, an upgrade over Kirk Cousins. Having said that, there's some things that even without the off-the-field issues, it's not going to do anything for the cap. I think the cap almost would be the same if he were to come here. I think I read it was like $35 million. I don't know what it is for the rest of his contract, but
I think it goes, if I remember right, it goes 35, 42, 40, and then back down to like 32 for the 4 years remaining. And there's an out clause after the third year.
And we're starting to see that become more of a norm, too. I saw a report yesterday that Derek Carr is expected to be somewhere in that $40 million range. So I don't know if we can necessarily sit here and still complain that Kirk Cousins is going to be, yes, $45 million is a lot. Maybe they can reduce that cap hit. But at the end of the day, these quarterbacks, with the salary caps rising, the most important position on the field is going to continue to grow. They're going to keep paying these superstars more and more money. And instead of drafting a quarterback in a down draft class, you'd already be getting in the building a proven superstar who is only 26 years old that is going to make this offense with an offensive-minded head coach that much more electrifying. I certainly think that's something that the Vikings should at least monitor. I think Russell Wilson is another name that Vikings fans should keep their eyes on just in case he does. There's been some weird stuff with Russell Wilson, not to completely shift the show, but there's been some weird stuff out of Seattle the last couple of seasons with Russell Wilson, too. This could be a really extremely entertaining offseason at the quarterback position, moving pieces throughout. I don't want to say every team, obviously, because there's a lot of teams that have great quarterbacks already that aren't going to be willing to play with them. But this could be an extremely interesting offseason. You see the Tom Brady's retire and the Ben Roethlisberger retire, and a lot of the guys that kind of molded the last generation of football are leaving. And now that opens the gates for all these younger guys to claim that superstar status. And I think, like I said, legal stuff aside, Deshaun Watson in Minnesota would make that offense just extremely electrifying and so much fun to watch.
Russell Wilson doesn't do anything for me. 37 million this year, 40 million the next year. So it's still not a cap relief unless he signs something that extends him. And I don't want him extended. This last year, anyone who plays fantasy football knows that Russell Wilson had a down year before the injury, after the injury for sure. Wasn't doing a whole lot for me. What Deshaun Watson does offer is the youth, the ability, when you bring someone in like that has 4 years left on a contract, that is 26 years old, it's not a rent-a-player. This is not you bring a player in, see if they like it here. You assume that they're going to come in, that they're going to change the face of this franchise, become the franchise quarterback, and like it here enough to continue the rest, maybe finish his career here. That's the assumption that you have to make, and then you build from around that. Now, you look at, you talk about how it doesn't allow this team to get a lot of cap relief. It gets a little bit, but it's not the kind of cap relief that we were talking about we needed to rebuild that offensive line, to do these sorts of things. I don't know that you need to do that as much with a guy like Deshaun Watson, a very mobile guy who is able to elude some of these things. The last time we saw him play, if you remember, he was young, so it's not like he has the polished nature of Aaron Rodgers, but he has that mobility to escape pressure, and you add in the ability to run that Rodgers doesn't have. It's that lethal mix of being able to pass the ball, elude pressure, and run the ball if need be. That does a whole lot of wonders for an offensive line that might just be mediocre. Now we can talk about defensive players and all the things we need to spend money on. There's a lot of opportunities here, but as that salary cap continues to go up, those $40 million contracts hit a little bit less each year, and after the second year of this contract with Deshaun Watson, it starts going down on the back end, and it gets down to 32 million by the time you get to that fourth year. Now there's an out clause. He probably would take that out clause and push for a new contract. That being said, Deshaun Watson opens up some possibilities for this team. That article that Fowler wrote went on to talk about this window of opportunity, these intriguing pieces with Justin Jefferson and Delvin Cook that you have in the mix here. This offense that might be innovative and have this new style that O'Connell could bring, and whoever he brings with him could bring from Sean McVay. That's attractive, and I do think that has put the Vikings on this radar. The price tag is going to be high, right? This is going to be a situation where the price tag is going to be high. The Texans haven't really gotten to a point where we really know exactly what that price tag is going to be. But new head coach of the Houston Texans, Lovie Smith, made a statement this week about how he wants this situation to be wrapped up soon, like within the week, I think is what he said. I'm trying to remember exactly what that quote was, but he said he wanted it wrapped up soon so that they can decide where they're going with their franchise. Are they building around Deshaun Watson? Are they building around extra first-round draft picks? Whatever that might be. So, Jack, I'm going to throw out a potential trade, and you tell me if you have any interest in doing this, okay? Kirk Cousins. Okay, this is for Deshaun Watson, okay? Kirk Cousins, the 2022 first-round pick, and a 2023 first-round pick. And then, the Houston Texans can throw in any other fourth-round picks or whatever they want on the back end there. But the brunt of this deal being Kirk Cousins and 2 first-round picks for Deshaun Watson. Is that of any interest to you?
I would say yes, if they can confirm that he's through the legal stuff. If you risk giving, I was going to say this too. If a Deshaun Watson trade were to happen and he becomes a Minnesota Viking, I think it puts a lot more pressure on both Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell to win now. Not only win now, but the way that they're going to get to that point is hitting on free agents and hitting on the draft, something that Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman, quite frankly, did not do a good job of. I think the last 2 draft classes they had, I'm trying to do math off the top of my head, but I think they were around I think it was 26 total picks in back-to-back years, which is a crazy amount. And quite frankly, right now, the majority of those feel like they've been wasted, which is frustrating. So there's going to be pressure to get more talent on that defensive side of the ball. I think one thing that's interesting, if they do make that trade and Deshaun Watson is a Viking moving forward, I think first and foremost, the priority for this team is extending to Danielle Hunter as well. I think you have to keep that elite edge presence, especially if he's fitting in the scheme that they want to run. But if they come in and decide that he does fit in that 3-4 style, I think that has to be a priority, because if Danielle Hunter walks, or if he can't walk, if they trade Danielle Hunter, there is quite frankly no pass rush left along that defensive line. And without any pass rush, that defense it's going to take an even bigger step backwards, which I know that is crazy to say, because I don't think there's a lot of room for them to go backwards. But at the end of the day, I think I've said this a couple times in the last couple weeks. I think that edge position is top 3 most important positions on the football field. Obviously, quarterback is number 1. So if you can get a deal with Deshaun Watson that involves Kirk Cousins and a couple first-round picks, I'm not opposed to it. But like I said, I think the only way I am okay with stepping forward with that trade is knowing that Deshaun Watson is out of all the legal issues.
And we'll get to that, but let's dream a little bit first. Still, I do think, and I'm not a general manager, but from what we had heard from the Miami situation when it was kind of getting close and they maybe were going to do something, I think that 2 first-round picks and a quote-unquote expiring contract in Kirk Cousins would be enough to get the deal done. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to do it, but it would be enough to get the deal done. You have that, Lovie Smith looking to move on, turn the page from whatever the situation is potentially, right? If they're going to do that, they need to do that and make that decision so they can maximize the value and get what they get. And he doesn't want to wait. He doesn't want to wait another year, Lovie Smith, that is, to start rebuilding this team. He wants to start right away. And 2 first-round draft picks, one this year, one next year. You have a quarterback that, again, will do some things on the football field. So it's not going to be awful, but it's a similar enough money that they can afford it. They can get him in and then write him off right away. That very next year, off the books. You can draft a quarterback this year, have him learn behind Kirk Cousins, and then take the reins next year if they're working in that right direction. For the Minnesota Vikings, you talk about their need for money. We were already kind of to the mindset that Kirk Cousins wasn't going anywhere this year. It's been pretty clear that he's not willing to take a team-friendly deal. That doesn't mean he's not going to restructure potentially, but not a team-friendly deal. That shouldn't surprise anybody. He's never been that kind of a guy, never been interested in that. So we turn our attention to focusing and finding a way to bring in some cornerbacks, bring in some defenders, bring in some offensive line around that contract. So this is nothing new. This $37 million for this next season is nothing new for the Minnesota Vikings to even think about, right? You get a little extra money. You then start turning your head to do some other things. If they do go to that 3-4 scheme, Harrison Smith might not fit. Danielle Hunter might not fit. You can get some money back on the books in that way to bring in some outside linebackers to fit your new scheme a little bit, to bring in some cornerbacks that might fit that new scheme a little bit. It's going to be, personnel-wise, there's going to be a lot of familiar names that just don't fit because if they do come with a 3-4, it's very different. So the creativity, we have no idea. Right? We are so used to the way that Rick Spielman did things, the way that Mike Zimmer did things for the last 8 years, Spielman for 12 or whatever it was, that we don't know. We've forgotten what it's like to think outside the box and assume that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah can figure something out and do something that we don't expect him to do, like trade for a guy like Deshaun Watson. So again, this is all rumors that he's interested. He is interested in the Minnesota Vikings. It's time for the Minnesota Vikings to do their due diligence. Let's talk about the legal stuff. Do your due diligence on that legal situation. Last year, you probably didn't, right? Kwesi didn't for sure. Kevin O'Connell didn't for sure, but it's doubtful that the Minnesota Vikings as an organization even did last year because they weren't in the market for a quarterback. Kirk Cousins still had multiple years on his contract. We weren't looking for a big trade. We didn't have the leverage or the excitement to maybe trade multiple first-round draft picks. We had a couple bad trades for draft picks the last couple years. It just wasn't in the cards for the Minnesota Vikings to even do their research on this situation. Do your research. Figure out what the situation is. I saw an article about some settlement that was on the table as of this January. It's been on the table for a couple of weeks. I don't know what that means. If they're trying to get all 22 people to figure this out, if they're trying to, if they're going to decline it, whatever that might be, you have those opportunities and those options to figure out what you can do. They need to do that. At the very least, you need to look into this situation and figure out what value might be there. And furthermore, then go from there and say, okay, is this a guy we're interested in bringing in, right? This is we've talked about culture. We've talked about the new direction for this team. Is this a situation where you had an immature person that made some bad decisions that we're not going to let him off the hook for, but hopefully he can learn from this? Or do we not want anything to do with this toxic personality? That's the decision that has to be made. It's a difficult decision, Jack. There's no easy answer, and we're not going to be the ones to make it. When you talk about football field, this is a potential superstar. When you talk about off the football field, this is a potential problem.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the speculation. Now that you finally got to that, I have something to ask you. We talk about trading these first-round picks, and maybe just because I love the draft so much, it scares me a little bit more. But say Ed Donatel comes in the door and he's like, you know what, this isn't going to work. Danielle Hunter, he's not the prototypical pass rusher that's going to work in my style of defense. Could the Vikings, put in our GM hats back on again, could the Vikings find a way to not have to really dip into that draft capital and dish a Danielle Hunter who's only 28 years old, a Kirk Cousins and a Harrison Smith, and get out of all that money and get in a bunch of talent through the draft still, keep that first round draft pick? I think I would be more willing to do something like that. Delvin Cook, I know you mentioned having the excitement factor of Delvin Cook on the field with Deshaun Watson, Justin Jefferson. Delvin Cook, paying running backs. I don't know if you've seen someone tweets it out every single year from the Super Bowl winning team, the cap hit for the top rushing running back for the winning team. It's never above, I think it's never above like $3 million. It's always a lower cap hit. And I've always been on the side of the spectrum that I don't necessarily love paying running backs. I will say I think Delvin Cook is a top 3 running back, but I think you can get away with having a good running back on a rookie contract that will allow you to build around your roster in different areas. So that's another area that I'd be intrigued to look into. I don't know if Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is going to want to come in here and start dishing all of these guys that have a connection to 99% of the Minnesota fan base. But like we've said on the show multiple times already, I think it's very fair to expect this roster to have a lot of turnover. It's going to look a lot different. And I think me personally, if I am a new GM of this team and Deshaun Watson, like I said, I'll keep saying this, legal stuff aside, I think something like that would have to pique your interest, especially if they come in and they kind of flip that defense and they say, you know what, Danielle Hunter at that cap hit with his injuries, we're going to add him to the trade as well. That's a lot of reckless speculation right now, but wanted to see what your thoughts would be on something like that as well.
I'd definitely be open to it, right? Especially if you deem that they don't fit. If you're of the mindset that you're going to a 3-4, and I'm not going to pretend I know enough about the intricacies of a switch from 3-4 to 4-3 and who can do it, who can't do it, what Danielle does. I've listened to Ben Lieber talk about it. Lieber started his career in a 3-4 and then switched to a 4-3 the rest of the way. Doesn't think that Danielle Hunter has the capability. The struggles that Danielle has to rush from a stand-up position are some things that he doesn't do well. He doesn't have that ability. Certain guys do, certain guys don't. A guy like Anthony Barr might actually be a better fit at that outside linebacker rush spot. You talk about the inside too. I mean, it's going to change a lot of things here. So if you are of the mindset that he's not going to fit, that big contract is basically going to become worthless, there are a lot of teams. I don't know what the Texans defense is. I think they're actually a 3-4, or they were. I guess I don't know what the new regime has over there. But if that's a trade piece, throw them in there. Or even talk about the possibility of trading this first round pick this year for Deshaun Watson, and then with the intent of getting one back in return from somebody else, a team that does run a 4-3 for a guy like Danielle Hunter. That needs to be your mindset. The interesting thing about the mindset for this team is you have a head coach who just came from an organization that successfully leveraged their future, right? Successfully traded away players for older players, for Matthew Stafford, for Von Miller, they didn't trade for Odell Beckham, but they brought those guys in. They traded away future picks for basically rent-a-players. Again, this situation is different than that. This could potentially not be a rent-a-player. This could be a potential franchise quarterback with 4 years on his deal, 26 years old. There's a lot of value there. So this is even different than that situation. You could trade those 2 draft picks away, and by the time you get back to drafting in the first round again, he still has 2 years on his contract. You've had 2 more years to formulate this team around the new regime on offense and defense, and you're ready to get the draft capital back and start going again. The possibilities, again, I know I'm sounding like I'm looking through the world through purple glasses, and I probably am, but it's an interesting wrinkle that yesterday we didn't have any thoughts of. And today we do, and today we're speculating wildly and dangerously and maybe inaccurately. So there's a lot to think about. It's literally one report, but it sounds like there is at least some interest from Deshaun Watson in inquiring about the Minnesota Vikings as a potential trade landing spot. That first hurdle, if this is true, is cleared. That trade, no trade clause has been cleared because he would be interested in coming here. then you got to make it work. You got to make the value work. You got to get going there and just make sure that it's the right thing for you to do off the field and on the field. Jack, I'm going to pull up our poll of the day here in a second, but I want to remind anybody who's watching this video chat, if you want, throw some thoughts in. Let us know how you feel about Deshaun Watson. Let us know how you feel about Kevin O'Connell. If you have any questions about how Watson fits, whatever, we'll do our best to answer them here. But Jack, I'm going to pull up our poll of the day right over here. It was interesting. I put out these articles about Deshaun Watson. I put it and the initial response was largely negative in the comment section. Okay. Largely negative in the comments. A bunch of people, like we're seeing in our comments here, saying, no way, don't bring the distraction. Don't bring the clown show. Don't do this. Can't trust a guy like that who with off the field issues. Then I put the poll out. Just a little different, right? You don't have to comment. You just click yes or no. The question was, Deshaun Watson is reportedly interested in the Minnesota Vikings. Should the Vikings be interested in him? A simple yes or no. This was pulled, the screenshot was pulled about 30 minutes ago before we went on the air here. 56% say no. 44% say yes, that they would potentially be interested in Deshaun Watson. There were more than 2,000 people that had already voted in this poll by the time that we got this, Jack. That means that there's a lot of people that do have some interest in Deshaun Watson and bringing him in here. So this is not a simple thing where everybody says no because of all the off-the-field distractions. There's interest there, right? Rightfully so. There should be some interest there. So are you surprised by that at all?
I'm not, because like I've said, he hasn't jumped that hurdle of clearing the legal stuff. I think if he were to clear that and those allegations were to all go away magically, I think the numbers on that poll would change drastically, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a similar cap. You're going to a 26-year-old instead of a 33 or 34-year-old, whatever Kirk Cousins is. And quite frankly, the couple years that we were able to watch Deshaun Watson play, I think it's safe to say you can put him at the top 5, top 6 quarterback. And I don't think there's people out there that are going to say Kirk Cousins is close to that. Some games maybe he is, but some games he might be closer to 16, 17, 18. He kind of fluctuates between that, and just he would bring in that style that I think the overwhelming majority of the Vikings fan base has wanted, that youth movement, more of a mobile prospect. I shouldn't say prospect because he's been in the league already, but he would make the offense that much more entertaining. And at the end of the day, there's going to have to be, like you said, the Vikings have to do their due diligence. There's no, if they make the trade and it blows up in their face, the fan base is going to be at TCO Performance Center with pitchforks, because they're going to be pretty ticked off about it. Because if they don't do their due diligence and they make that hire and he comes into Minnesota and the stuff follows him, that is not going to be a good look for a first-time GM, first-time head coach, and Vikings ownership. So I agree 100% with what you were saying. The Vikings really have to dive into this. There's certainly been stuff in this franchise's history where it's been similar legal stuff with Adrian Peterson, the Love Boat, some of the Randy Moss stuff, which is a little bit before my time. I was a little bit younger at that time. But there's been off-the-field issues that have followed this team throughout my lifetime, and this would likely be another one right away. But if they can clear those hurdles, I don't see a reason why fans would be opposed to it when you're getting a younger quarterback that at the end of the day is a better quarterback than Kirk Cousins.
A couple of things I do want to cover real quick before we get to the questions that we just got too excited to touch base on. We're assuming that he is in shape. Okay, we're assuming that he's healthy. We're assuming all these things, right? This is essentially an injury where a player missed an entire season. Minus the injury part, right? He could have been working out the entire time. So you don't have to rehab. You don't have to get back in shape, assuming he's taking care of himself, because he was ready to do this last year and go play for a team as early as last year. The other thing that we need to assume, Jack, is or factor in, because I don't think we can assume, factor in the potential for a league suspension. That's a part of what the Vikings need to do their research on and figure out if there is going to be a suspension, or put in some sort of clause. Austin in the chat mentioned that there should be a clause on those draft picks. If Watson is suspended, those draft picks go from first round to third round or whatever it is, depending on the length of the suspension, or I mean, it's kind of unfounded. So I don't even know where to put a value on that, but some sort of research you need to figure out on whether or not the league is going to suspend him. These are civil suits, so it's a little bit different, right? It's not a criminal situation. These are lawsuits brought against someone. And I'm not justifying the actions by any means, but I don't know how to handle that. I don't know how to weigh that compared to criminal complaints and criminal situations that we've seen from the league before. So that's for them to do. They have experts that do that. The Vikings have experts that look into those things. So we factor all of that in. Then we bring Matt Selvig's comment up here. He wouldn't make the trade. He needs some sort of draft picks for the defensive side. Kirk and 2 first-rounders is too much. I'd argue that Kirk is as talented or more talented than Watson, just not good at running the football, but in the pocket, I'd take Kirk. You kind of talked on a couple of these things, Jack. I agree with your stance that Deshaun Watson, if he is what he was when we last saw him, is a top 5 quarterback compared to Kirk, who's like a top 10 to 15. I think that's the right range to put him in. There's a big difference between top 5 and even top 10, right? That top 5 quarterbacks are game-changing quarterbacks that can take over games. Kirk can get you back and fight you back in 2-minute drives and all these things, but he can't take over a game the way that Aaron Rodgers can, the way that Tom Brady could, the way that, even the guy like Dak Prescott who's shown signs of that, but not the consistency. Deshaun Watson is a top 5 quarterback, a game-changing quarterback. I don't think anyone would say Kirk Cousins is a game-changing quarterback. Would you argue with that?
No, and they don't grow on trees. You don't find quarterbacks that are capable of being in the conversation of being top 5. And that's why I'm a little bit surprised by that poll that you just showed. But again, I think the legal stuff and the uncertainty around him, I think that bogs this stuff down quite a bit. And I think it does for both you and myself as well.
Yeah. A lot of the feel in the chat, and Rory's just scared of the off the field issues. The KOC will be great. Kevin says that KOC would be great with Watson, having him in purple here. And then Maddie jumps in and says, if he has any legal issues, I don't think it's a good start to run as a new coach. I love Deshaun, the player, but obviously those legal issues come with some baggage. Some comments coming in as well. Come on, China says AJ is going to win the initials game 5 on Friday. I like that. I'm feeling that one. That's good. And then our last comment, Maddie also chimed in and said, deal Hunter, Kirk, and get some new fresh people in, even Barr, and build like the Bengals revamped the team. There's some new styles, right? You have a team like the Bengals and you have a team like the Rams that gets there 2 very different ways. The Bengals built from youth. They built from change. They built from, the traditional way, if you will. You can do that with a guy like Joe Burrow. That's pretty easy. But then the Rams went out and got the pieces to put it together. So you're going to have dueling mindsets with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, with I'm completely blanking on his name. The guy that came from the Colts, who is the senior personnel guy that's going to help out Kwesi. I'm blanking on his name, but another perspective, right? He's had some different experiences to bring to the table. And then you have Kevin O'Connell, who is on a team that did leverage their future and be aggressive to go out and get a championship at all costs. That's not what this is. I'm going to say it again. That's not what this is. I would trade 2 draft picks in Kirk Cousins today for Deshaun Watson, pending legal stuff and suspension and all of that. I would do it today. Deshaun Watson is a transformative player, a generational player. The opportunity to have him come in here, this could be the franchise quarterback that we have maybe never had here in Minnesota. And he's under contract for 4 years. He's 26 years old. The last time we saw him, I said it early in this podcast, 5,000 yards, 33 passing touchdowns, nearly 500 rushing yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns. That's not on roster right now. We don't have that on this roster right now. It opens up a playbook in a different way that Kirk can't. It opens up the opportunities for the players that you need or don't need to bring in free agency in the draft. You can change your mindset as far as where you need to focus immediately with that. And he does come in and keep this team competitive right away. We haven't talked about that yet, Jack, either. There's no drop-off. Assuming he's picking up where he left off for the most part, there's not a drop-off from Kirk Cousins to Deshaun Watson. You compete right away. And if you can fill some of those holes on defense, if you can make some moves to do that, you have a first-year head coach who could compete for a playoff spot with a playoff quarterback right away.
Yeah, a couple of things. Ryan Grigson is the name that we were looking for. And this is just, I don't know why this just came to my memory, but I'm almost positive that it was Dabo Sweeney when there were teams that passed. I believe Deshaun Watson went 12th, 2 picks after Patrick Mahomes. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But when he was drafted, I think Dabo Sweeney said there's going to be a lot of teams shaking their heads in regret that they didn't draft Deshaun Watson because he is a Michael Jordan caliber player. He compared him to the greatness of Michael Jordan, who in my opinion is the GOAT in basketball. That we can save that argument for another day because I'm not the biggest basketball guy, but I will die on that hill that MJ is the GOAT. But just saying that, and it just shows the confidence levels that Dabo Sweeney had in him running his offense in Clemson. Like I said, he was a national champion at Clemson. And he had some very, very good seasons early on in his career with a not so great franchise in the Houston Texans. So I think it would certainly spark an excitement level that this team really hasn't had on the offensive side of the ball, probably since Brett Favre in 2009. That was a different feel. I know Kirk Cousins, there's been times where I've argued that I have that feeling with him, but there's also times where it's like, you look like Case Keenum with no pocket awareness, and that's frustrating. There's different times where Kirk Cousins can be, like we just said, a top 8, top 9, top 10 quarterback, but then there's just inconsistencies. And I'm not saying Deshaun Watson doesn't have some inconsistencies in his game, but at the end of the day, he is that top 5 caliber player. He has a different persona to him. He plays a little bit with more swagger, kind of what we've talked about all along, and wanting at the quarterback position instead of a Kirk Cousins. But I feel like I have to say this every single time with the legal stuff. You just have to get through that battle before any sort of deal can be made, because that's going to be the talking point that's going to follow him until that stuff is either cleared or proven that, hey, it actually did happen.
100%. A couple other points, and then we can, get people in the chat are bringing some good heat today. F. Trevino mentioned that these are civil lawsuits, not criminal, right? He has not been arrested for these things. So there is some discrepancy or nuance to the situations, let's say. Another thing I want to mention too is his time in Houston. He didn't play last year, not because he was suspended, not because he was being punished, because he doesn't want to be there, right? So it's kind of a holdout situation, and the Texans just deactivated him so he wasn't a distraction from the outset, right? We were going to training camp, and it was still a question of whether he was going to be active or not, and they basically just deactivated him so he wouldn't talk to the press anymore, and kind of protected him there. So he wasn't suspended by the league, hasn't been yet. He certainly could have been already, right? I don't know why if they're going to suspend him, there's really no reason to wait for these civil lawsuits to be, come to some resolution. That the criminal investigations are where those suspensions come into play. That hasn't happened yet. One other thing to just note is Kwesi Adofo-Mensah looks at everything differently, specifically differently than Rick Spielman did. There is going to be a quantitative assessment of Deshaun Watson and what he could bring to the table if they are really going to look at him. If they're interested, they're going to have people and experts and everybody do their research on the off the field situations, and then they're going to look at the analytics. He's going to look at all the data that goes into this, right, in a different way than Rick Spielman had in the past, and say, okay, if we feel comfortable with answering some questions, working through the first couple of weeks with the circus and the press coming to do this, is this going to be ultimately a good move for our football team? They're going to look at it in a different way that we haven't seen yet, right? That has me super excited, not specifically or not solely for this situation, but for free agency in general, for the draft in general. We don't know, right? It's been 13 years since we've had a different person making decisions for this team, and it seems like it's going to be done in a very different way. So we don't know what they're doing in the draft. We don't know what they're doing in free agency, and we sure as heck don't know what they're going to do with this Deshaun Watson situation. So we speculate. We have fun. We talk about it. We can talk in the comment section, talk in Twitter, and talk on our podcast. So that's what we're doing today, Jack. We'll tie a bow on the day right there. I appreciate you taking some time out. I know you're a busy week. I got a busy week. Everybody tune in for the Preposterous Statement Tournament tomorrow with the common man, Dan Cole. I believe it starts at 12:15 to 2 o'clock or so. We'll have a cool live stream video session going as well. That's what I'm working on right now. And then we'll continue to get ready for next week's edition of the State of Purple podcast. If you don't subscribe already, head over to iHeartRadio, iTunes, or wherever you get your favorite podcast. Make sure you do subscribe so you can get every episode of the State of Purple podcast delivered straight to you, your phone, your inbox, wherever you want it. You can get it there and always be alerted when we do a new recording. We might do one later this week even, depending on how Kevin O'Connell comes across and if it's a good thing or a bad thing, or we have something to talk about on Friday. So, Jack, I appreciate you taking the time. We'll talk to you next week on the State of Purple podcast presented by Pilot Games.
10 seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop. Steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay